Welcome to our podcast episode. Today we're privileged to host Professor Tamara Grdzelidze, graduate from Faculty of Georgian Philology at Ivan Ejevachishvili State University, where she did postgraduate studies and was awarded degree of Candidate of Humanities for the thesis on symbolics of the early Georgian hagiography. Professor Grdzelidze worked as a researcher at Chota Rustaveli Institute of Georgian Literature, taught Georgian language and literature at Gymnasium, continued further studies at St. Vladimir Seminary in New York, at Anglican School, and Ripon College, in England, UK, was enrolled as a doctoral student of Eastern Christian Studies at Oxford, was awarded DPhil for thesis, Place, Space, and Writings of Maximus the Confessor, worked as an executive for Orthodox theology at Secretariat of the Faith and Order Commission, World Council of Churches, Geneva in Switzerland, and was an ambassador of Georgia to the Holy See, as well as she published extensively on a number of topics. Today we'll be talking about her recent and forthcoming book, Ecclesiastical Boundaries and National Identity in the Orthodox Church. So it's a major topic given the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also the whole dynamics and discrepancies between the legal and canonical borders. So we're very thrilled to have you today. More than welcome, Professor Grdzelidze. So our first question today will be, what is the key argument of the book? What's the kind of key takeaway that we can think of for the broader audience? And as you know, our audience is kind of a generalist audience. So what is the main takeaway from the book?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be your guest today, first time. And yes, it's not so easy to mention one general topic, which has been covered extensively in the book, because if we look at the title, it says ecclesial borders, yes, then national identity and the Orthodox Church. So there are several topics which are examined in order to get to know what is happening with the Orthodox Church when it tries to be an agent or a participant in ecumenical encounters. And not only, but also my major interest was to see the problematics between the Orthodox, which is then directly taken into ecumenical field. So inter-Orthodox dynamics affect inter-Christian dynamics for the Orthodox.
And very interesting question, of course, is given the context of now, many people argue that all global Orthodoxy is kind of silent given the war. How does your book or findings of your book reflect on the global Orthodoxy per se and its contemporary kind of responses to the global crisis that was caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, actually, both key questions that you mentioned now in your question, global Orthodoxy and contemporary issues, are taken very seriously in this book, because it is not a book about one church. It tries to tackle the issue of Orthodoxy worldwide, although it takes three areas as examples of contextualization of Orthodoxy today. So these are Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine. And so the interesting dynamic between these three places, which are all based on same principles and try to play out the same sort of structure of being the church, but how they differ and how different emphasis they make on their in their ecclesiological understanding of being the church is probably the most interesting part of this research.
And very important question, which is often is raised in discussion, is this whole discrepancy between canonical and legal. Can you help us to understand what's the notion of canonical territory in Orthodox theology, and also maybe reflect briefly on the territory per se? How do churches understand territory?
It's a very interesting and complex question, and I start exactly from there. Geographic borders, which were actually the most important characteristic for characterization of local churches in Eastern Roman Empire. So how then these local churches developed into autocephalous churches, and then, autocephalous as such did not come into existence for some time, but still, the churches which we have now, territorial churches, which are autocephalous churches, bring, or rather inherited into their ecclesiology something which has been taken as something unchangeable, perhaps, but also they never try to reflect on this legacy. So what was territoriality in the Eastern Roman Empire as a mark of this autonomy that the churches had later became a stumbling block, because now we live in a very different world from 4th century or whatever, the first millennium. Autocephaly still applies as one of the major characteristics of Orthodox Church. It's sometimes we have problems with it on both sides, actually. On the one hand, when we speak about canonicity, yes, canonical territories are, yes, autocephalous churches have their canonical territories, yes, like Georgian Church. Georgian territory, today it's today's Georgia. It canonically belongs to the Orthodox Church of Georgia, but we know that there are many other churches, and they are entirely it's natural that they are here because they came here historically. They started to be here, but this problem between the canonicity and legality, it sounds like it is problematic, but in fact it's not. If the Church, Orthodox Church, really understands and reflects on what does it mean today to live in a secular world. So there are many layers of historicity to be taken into account in order to make a sharp distinction, or to understand it clearly, what it means to be a part of the canonical church, and also legally to be a citizen of this or another country, so state. So that's not as complex as it may sound, but it needs some special reflection on the part of the Church, Orthodox Church.
This kind of brings also the conversation about the whole engagement of Orthodox churches in geopolitics. So what's your take? Why do churches participate in geopolitics if you think they do, and what is the nature of their involvement?
Yeah, because it goes so close with the idea of nationality, right? This national identity pushes somehow the church, even without, if they don't want it, but definitely they want it, to be a national church, right? For instance, in Georgia, if we take the Georgian example, there were periods where the Orthodox Church historically really played important role in preserving, in the national identity, in contributing to the creation of Georgian nation, yes, but not only. It's not only the church, but one of the components of this process. On the other hand, as soon as this national identity becomes, becomes a foundation for political power, when it is used as a political leverage, then it is quite problematic. For instance, Ukrainian example, that's what I discuss in my book. When at the moment, I think that the way autocephaly functions today in our churches is problematic because autocephaly cannot be taken from generation to generation, from centuries to centuries, without understanding what it means in that period of time, in that period of history. So today, what and how autocephaly should be functioning, it should be reflected by the whole body of the church, not only locally by local churches, but also by the Orthodox Church as a whole, as a body of Christ. At the same time, we see that autocephaly can be taken as a negative sort of aspect of the church life when it tries to take orthodoxy into a very nationalistic and political direction. But on the other hand, it can be also a positive thing. For instance, like it was in the battle for independence in the Ukrainian case, So I want to say that I think autocephaly is not an updated sort of or fully understandable and adequate aspect of the ecclesiology, Orthodox ecclesiology today, but because it exists, because it is there, and all churches function according to the historic autocephaly, Ukraine, as an independent sovereign state, wants to have independent or self-governing autocephalous Ukrainian church, which is a normal thing. Yeah, the abnormality, in my view, is to equate statehood with one church, which autocephaly provides somehow to all churches, to Orthodox churches, traditional Orthodox churches. They are national churches.
Which is kind of a philetic thing, isn't it? I mean, to an extent, it's not phileticism.
It's not always, I don't consider it entirely philetistic, because there are certain things, as I already mentioned, which should be cherished that the Orthodox Church did historically, but it should not be taken to its it shouldn't be taken for granted that it is so today. So that's what I mean. It's okay that autocephaly played a special role in the first millennium or in the Middle Ages, but today autocephaly has another role, and this should be considered against the background of societies and states we live in. Unfortunately, it is not done.
Why so?
Well, because we've never had the opportunity, the churches or the Orthodox Church has never had an opportunity to think together. I mean, even the Crete meeting did not allow this with the minimum of program that it provided. It was not possible.
And it's the conflict of interests gradually.
Yeah, gradually, that's what I mean, yes. Gradually, the problem is that when autocephaly functions in that way, in a negative way, we get these national churches occupied by national interests, and they are, national interests which they want to extend to other churches, to other states, like the Russian Church does. Yes, the Church of Russia does. But in the Ukrainian case, as I said, it is national interest. But on the other hand, because it is the norm, it's a rule, they use this to bring or to use it for their independence, to prove their, to add something to the sovereignty.
I wonder what's the theological root of this civilizational ideologies, this kind of Christian civilizationism, which is very often underlining the idea of Russian world, which is again the discourse, or as I discuss in my book, kind of a hybrid of an ideology and a project, which Kremlin uses for justifying its foreign policy and kind of hegemony, what it calls its near abroad. I wonder what sort of theological root, if at all any, does this civilization ideology has?
Well, theologically, I don't think theologically there is anything, but ecclesially and ecclesiologically there was this historic understanding of Symphonia that the Church and Emperor made decisions very often together. Sometimes they contradicted one another, but in general, the Church and State complemented each other. So that was that is the root of this. But I mean, today to speak about this in democratic societies, that the Church and state complement each other, it's a bit contradiction in terms. All agents of a society, democratic society, are independent agents. They cannot. They all serve in their own capacity the state, but they cannot serve the governments. So that's a difference which is not as subtle as it sounds if you understand what is a democratic society and how secular states function.
That's in theory, but in practice we learn that churches are involved in kind of policy influence, and they're really impacting geopolitics as well.
Yeah, because the countries that you have in mind have not reached that level. We have de juris perhaps, but not de facto secular society or certainly there are certain things which are in Georgia at large is secular. You can't say that it's not a secular country, but again, what does it mean? And then it is not one level of secularity, and very often we see, as you said, that the church is involved in many political decisions, and the church, I'm talking about the Georgian example now, church provides to huge electorate so it's a huge political interest because they have so many people who listen to them, to the church, and therefore it's there, that the church feeds its own interests by feeding the interests of politics.
Yeah, can you guide us through? Your book? How the structure of the book, but also some kind of. So if you may put a spoiler alert for those who are interested, of course, to buy it. But I wonder if you can guide us through a little bit of, or give us the gist of the argument. And by the way, a quote for Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury: "A vital book for understanding the current challenges in the Eastern Christian world," he says about the book. So I wonder if you can guide us about. If you just give us the gist of the argument as well as kind of a broader structure of the book.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that main thing which contributed to my to this work is my experience. Experience as Christian, experience as theologian, that I was brought up in Christian family under Soviet regime, then studying hagiography again in the Soviet times. Then I studied in St. Vladimir's in Oxford under Bishop Callistos Ware, so that was a huge experience. Then most of all working in Geneva because when I worked as Orthodox theologian in ecumenical institution, it meant that I was actively collaborating with clergy and bishops and clerics of all traditions. And as a woman theologian, you don't have this opportunity, So that was a very, very interesting experience, and probably the most formative for my professional background, but also most important for the book which I wrote. And then certainly this 4.5 years in Vatican were very also important part of my experience as theologian.
You mean ambassadorial?
Ambassadorial, yes, I was ambassador, but because I was theologian, I could not become just ambassador. I was theologian ambassador. So, and then, I was struck by while working in Geneva, I was struck by the inability of the Orthodox to express themselves freely or not to be able to join others in decisions. And this was something which was, I was observing it all the time, that Orthodox always had to, however they were involved in the discussion, wouldn't matter. Every time they would end up by going back to their this statement that Orthodox Church is the one Holy Catholic Church and does not, in fact, recognize other Christians as churches. Not always maybe saying these words, but content was this. And I was very interested because you cannot deny that there was enthusiasm on the part of the Orthodox when they joined the ecumenical movement. In the beginning of the 20th century, there were these letters coming from the ecumenical patriarchate and the ecumenical patriarch, there was this encouragement to all Christians to be together, to do things together as Christians. But then Orthodox, when it gets to doing things, they have problems. For instance, the most recent and absolutely astonishing is the inability of the Orthodox to say Lord's Prayer together with, I don't mean all Orthodox, but very often in ecumenical, maybe the Georgians, for sure, the Georgians don't say any prayer with others, that's for sure. But also other Orthodox find it problematic to, and you cannot stay in ecumenical movement unless you are at least able to say Lord's Prayer together. It's a bit disappointing, to say the least. Yeah. So this was my trigger that why. So then I started thinking about these things, and then two major events, that's what I write in the introduction, gave impulse, a strong impulse. This was that the Great and Holy Council of Crete in 2016, which, 4 churches tried to make it an event.
Which took ages to organize in the first place.
It was more than 50 years.
Yeah. 50 years to organize.
But these 50 years also should be, this is one thing to say, but imagine during these 50 years, the churches of the Soviet Union could not participate freely. They were part of the ecumenical movement, we know this, but it was not the same. They didn't have capacity, they didn't have freedom or anything to participate freely in this discussion. So participation of the Orthodox from the Soviet Union in the ecumenical movement was a completely different thing, and even though they attended these meetings, their presence would mean nothing, theologically they would not contribute to this meeting. So on the one hand, we say that it's 50 years behind this preparation, but on the other hand, it's not exactly 50 years, although before Crete, all heads of Orthodox churches met couple of times, and they agreed that they were. So the meeting should have happened, but because of the threat that some important questions would be raised, the Russian Orthodox Church didn't want it, so it's clear that Russian Orthodox Church and a couple of its satellite churches did not...
including the Georgian Church.
Yeah, sure. The Georgian Church is one of its satellite church, yes. So, yes. So this was one event, I was very much looking forward to this, to the Crete meeting. I even was invited as a consultant, but because I was ambassador at that time, I couldn't accept it, as an official position, and then I couldn't justify just going there as a tourist. So anyway, and then another thing was granting Thomas to Orthodox Church of Ukraine was very important. So these two major events that really, after this book sort of emerged by itself somehow, all my thoughts were there in order to justify my thoughts through this event, sort of, and then, yes.
So it's if I may summarize, it's this sort of the genealogy of global orthodoxy, if you will. That's the
global orthodoxy. I speak about global orthodoxy, and I make a distinction. It is very much in the air now in academic circles also to speak about the orthodoxy. I try to show that, yes, sure, we speak about the orthodoxy because we all come from the same roots, but at the same time they are very different. The histories are very different. I mean, how can you compare Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine? I mean, we all come with different stories, with different backgrounds and different aspirations. Today, we stand closer to Ukraine because we all both experience this post-Soviet past, and we try to be sovereign in the shadow of Russia. So that's,
And it's interesting in the title, ecclesiastical boundaries.
Yes.
You don't mention either borders, or you're careful with those words.
I distinguish. These are, and which will be difficult to say probably in Georgian. I already think about it, because borders I call geographic borders, and boundaries are more social boundaries, which is a problem in the Orthodox Church. That's what I was trying to explain. That if we could, the Church, if the Orthodox Church could have a clear understanding of the boundaries that we live within today, in secular societies, then it would function better, I think.
Are boundaries a bigger deal for Orthodoxy than borders, the legal borders?
Or depends which church you are talking about. I mean, for Russia, they are both problematic because Russia is imperial Russia, and it wants to make subordinate all neighboring territories and cultures. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Georgian is a very different. They know. I mean, we are very different with language and culture, and this is an older church. But they sometimes you see that they acknowledge that what Tsarist Russia did was not the right thing, abolishing autocephaly, although, it was the same, autocephaly, but although in Russia at that time they didn't have patriarchs, so it was also, Georgia should have thought about it, that, Russia would not allow to have patriarch and autocephaly in Georgia. But anyway, so what they did with the Church of Georgia during the Tsarist time is you come across this idea that, it was not the right thing. Also, this Council of Moscow, 1918 Council, also raised this question about what Russia did wrong in Georgia. But still, they have this aspiration to influence Georgia through the church, and they do it. They use different methods today. They don't try to Russify by, for instance, abolishing Georgian language. That would not be possible, but like they did in the Tsarist times. But there are other means, to.
I wonder if you, in what way you relate and how would you reflect to this thesis that Russian state is using the church as much as Russian church is using the state?
Well, I think the situation is such that the Russian state is too strong and powerful to, now that we see that Russia is not really that powerful, which is a great news, I think. But still, I think in Russia, the church, the Orthodox Church, is trying to be helpful. This Russian world, Ruski Mir, and all this was really an attempt on the part of the Russian Orthodox Church to be fully involved into Russian geopolitics. So the church also agrees with what politically at the moment Putin's regime tries to do. That at least now probably they are today they have other thoughts perhaps, and they have other problems. But before the war, Russian Orthodox Church definitely agreed fully with the political aspirations of Russian state, which means that they believed in extending its influence, ecclesial influence, beyond the borders of the Russian state.
How much of an actor, or how do you recognize the agency of Orthodox churches in an international affairs? How much actorness is there? Or it's ingrained being instrumentalized and be part of the kind of political power and basically be used all the time? Or is there an actorness itself? Or there is more like symphonia?
You mean, there is a big difference now, what you're asking. Big churches, for instance, Russian Orthodox Church, maybe Romanian too, I don't know, I shouldn't be mentioning this, but Russian Orthodox Church has, as a local church, as one body, has its own dialogues, for instance, with other churches. For instance, with Lutherans, they have this, I know. But when Orthodox Church participates in ecumenical encounters, whether bilateral or multilateral, they go as one church. See, for instance, when there is a Roman Catholic Orthodox dialogue, or representatives of all Orthodox churches go as one group. Mm-hmm. So they it should be like this. Mm-hmm. If we agree with our ecclesiology, it should be like this. But we don't agree. Therefore, this encounter is always problematic and almost a joke, because where they come to discuss things with a church which is not part of their church, and they cannot agree with one another in order to start a serious conversation with others. So this, I have many friends on both sides of this dialogues normally. So I have these jokes from other side that the Orthodox come together and then they start quarreling because they don't know each other. They don't want to know each other. They want to present their own interests in front of everything, so that's their priority. And then,
we meet with a great friend and colleague, Kirill Hoveron. We discussed in one of the episodes this kind of anomaly of Orthodox churches being involved in the war, in a way. And this war happened between two Orthodox churches, like Georgia, not Orthodox churches, but two Orthodox predominantly dominated states. Yeah. Georgia, Russia, Ukraine, Russia. So how does it make sense, in a way, if it does at all, ecclesiologically, to relate, how churches relate to these wars? How do they respond to these wars, and how they explain these wars? And is it possible to explain the war when two Orthodox churches obviously kind of are a big part of their national habitus, if you will.
Well, in a way now, Georgia and Ukraine are in inverted commas, better position, because Russia is an aggressor, and whatever the Georgian church says or churches in Ukraine say in defense of themselves, they are right, because it's an aggression. But for instance, I've written on this, the behavior of the Russian Orthodox Church in 2008 during the war was amazing. The Kirill, who was the head of the External Relations, Department of External Relations at the time, said that on television, he said that our country was attacked, or, this is just crazy. It's absolutely out of the possibilities how a church may speak about invasion.
So our country means Russia being attacked?
Yes. He said that our country, Russia, has been attacked by Georgia.
Okay. In 2008?
In 2008, yes, okay. 2008. And even now, as we know, he never says war, and now he doesn't speak even, I don't hear him speaking this lately, but in the beginning he was saying about the special operation and, and other things. So the worst thing is that, for me, very upsetting is that before Mariupol and Bucha, I think most people and most churches in the world still wanted to understand Russian Orthodox Church, to find excuses for the Russian Church. This is very upsetting, honestly, but today it will be very difficult to, find any excuse for their involvement or agreement with the Putin's regime.
Speaking of agreements, as I know, you're a staunch advocate of ecumenism, and I wonder what's the future of ecumenism given the situation and all the unfolding events that we've discussed.
Yeah, not very bright future for ecumenism at the moment on the part of the Orthodox, because I think pandemic was very useful for Orthodox situation because after Crete it will be very difficult to come together for all of us. There's especially after Thomas given by Patriarch Bartholomew to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and some churches, couple of, but still are supporting this, and the Russian Orthodox Church definitely instrumentalizes this situation to say that they are all against them. So that's always what the Russians are happy to claim.
The victimhood.
They are victims of the West. They are victims of ecumenical patriarchate. I don't know. All sorts of victimization against Russia, which is half of the world if you look at the map.
By the way, Putin is a fanboy of Ivan Ilyin, who is kind of the ideologist of this victimhood mentality, who himself was actually an admirer of Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, in case you're interested in his sort of fascist theology or ideology. And the last thing is that, is there a way out for the Russian Orthodox Church from the situation which it actually emerged to be in, whether willingly or not, as being kind of a legitimator of this war? Is there a solution that it finds its moral face somehow saving its face, or things are over for Kirill?
For Kirill, I think everything is over. I think if he has so much resources in himself to really change, convert, well, I would be very surprised, but I don't know. Well, let's think that it's possible. But you know what? I think a Russian Orthodox Church, like the Russian state, will be given a good opportunity now to change, really. All churches, all Orthodox churches should think very carefully about their role in this situation, in pan-Orthodox relations, and also with regard the war in Ukraine, and how could the church support to this extent the war, I mean, we know the reasons and we can analyze the situation, but on the other hand, I mean, it is odd that there is so much, so much material to approve this war, on the part of the Orthodox Church. And there is a very good, I heard recently, good, interesting interview by Anne Applebaum. She speaks about Russian state, definitely, but one of the arguments in her interview is that Russia should give up being empire and be a normal state, and then perhaps they will calm down and live peacefully and happier, and also give a happier life to their neighbors. I think the same is true about the Russian Orthodox Church, why they cannot stick to themselves and why they cannot live their own life instead of interfering into other people's lives, and why they cannot understand that Ukraine is a sovereign state and they cannot control Ukraine, either state or churches in Ukraine. And if they are so much upset about losing their possessions, let them take their possessions, let the people give them what belongs to them, what they paid for. Because always, even in the Tsarist times, when Benishevich came to Georgia, I mean, he was a great figure in Russian Orthodox Church, but he came to Georgia and he said, his claim was that how can... it is difficult to, after Georgia announced or restored autocephaly in 1917, Benishevich was sent from Moscow, and he said, but there are so many possessions that Russian Orthodox Church left in Georgia. What shall we do? I mean, they took so many things because they came here as aggressors, colonizers. So let them leave something, or let them take whatever they think belongs to them. Well, it's a big issue, but there is always a hope for change. No, we're Christians; we should believe in this.
Yeah, and on this note, let's end this wonderful interview. And thank you so much for a great talk and very enlightening conversation. Ecclesiological Boundaries and National Identity in Orthodox Church. Book forthcoming by Notre Dame University Press, and let the audience join us with a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.